Hello everyone, and welcome to Outside. Today we're going to be looking at something quite a bit different from what I've recently looked at. We're going to be looking at this pinball machine. It's a Chicago coin Catalina, and it's from 1948, so it's 76 years old. I just picked this up today. I am a huge fan of pinball machines, and I used to have, I think, 6, but I sold off 5 of them a few years back, so I still have 1, but now I've gone back up to having 2 pinball machines. I've never worked on one this old before, but I figure that I should have some experience working on pinball machines that are really old. So let's go ahead and take a look at this machine and see what needs to be done to it to make it work again. So here it is. This is the Chicago coin Catalina from 1948. And for being 76 years old, it's in really nice condition. I mean, look at the playfield. There's barely any wear on it whatsoever, and it looks like everything is there. Sure, it's got some scratches and wear and tear, but for being 76 years old, it's really not that bad. I mean, look at the back glass. That back glass has survived a long time. You can see there's a little bit of peeling off right here where the silver is. And I have noticed there's some little areas that are peeling, like kind of by this boat. But the colors on this back glass are still super vibrant, and it does not look like it's 76 years old. So whoever had this machine obviously tried their best to take care of it. I mean, the cabinet itself is also pretty nice. I mean, it's understandable there's some wear here because the flipper buttons are right there. But that looks really nice. And as you can see, this machine is old enough to have legs made out of wood as opposed to metal legs on all the newer pinball machines. On the front, we have our coin door, and this is the mechanism that you would insert coins into. You'd put your coin in there, push that in. Oops, this thing's on casters, so it's kind of rolling. But you would push that in, and when you're done playing a game, the balls would be in this little area down here. And when you push this in, it moves that back so the balls can fall back down into their little carriage that they go into. And so that would prep the machine to be ready to play. And how loading the balls into the plunger works is it's not automatic like on newer pinball machines where it would have a coil that sends the ball up here. This one's completely manual, so you can see right here in the front there are 2 plungers. This one here is your main plunger that you use to shoot the ball like on any other pinball machine. But this bottom one is actually what loads the ball. So you push this plunger in, and what that does is it raises one of the balls up from the carriage that's down here into the plunger. So if I push this plunger in, well, that's one of the issues I have to fix. Sometimes it loads up 2 accidentally, but that's how you load a ball into the plunger, and then you shoot it with the normal plunger. So that's how that works. And just by doing some initial poking around and checking this thing out, I have noticed some issues with it, as you would expect for a machine this old. For one, I saw that this flipper has a washer under the screw when all the rest don't. So you can see the other flippers do not have that. So I was messing with that, and I figured out that each of the 2 flippers on the same side is joined together. So if I flip this flipper up with my hand, it'll flip the other flipper too. And there's a little coil assembly underneath the playfield that moves them both at the same time. And this one here on the left does the same thing if I move the flipper. But this one, I noticed if I unscrew it and try to screw it in without the washer, is how it's supposed to, the flipper just moves 360 degrees and there's no stop. And there kind of still is no stop. You see how the washer just came loose and now it's just moving. So I think why that's happening is because I think there's supposed to be screw threads inside the flipper plastic housing here, and those threads are destroyed. And so instead of the screw moving along with the flipper as it's supposed to, it's just free in there, and so the flipper has nowhere to stop. As you can see, it's kind of still working. This flipper I think is fine because you can stop this flipper and it has a defined stop point. This flipper does not. So either I'm gonna have to use some epoxy to keep the screw in place so that it doesn't need the washer, or just buy a new flipper. So that's one of the issues I saw. And it looks like the rubbers on this machine are actually pretty soft. They're definitely not original. It looks like this one might be a little older. As you can see, it's cracking when I stretch it. This one looks pretty new. Yeah, this one's not cracking. So obviously someone went through and replaced the rubbers at some point. It probably wouldn't hurt to replace the rubbers again, especially since we have ones that are cracking. So they're obviously pretty old. I was looking at some of the switches for the in lanes and the coils that kick out the ball when it lands in the hole, and it looks like they close properly. Like when the ball lands in here, it'll close the switch properly. These looked okay too. I haven't looked at every single one, so there still could be a problem, but they all looked good to me. But where the main problem is that I found is in the back box. Here's the back box. There should be a wooden door that covers this, but it's missing. So back here, we have our connections coming up from the play field into these big connectors here. This here is the credit loading mechanism. There's two coils attached to it. This coil, if you press it, it will move this wheel, and back here there's another wheel that has little numbers on it, and those numbers indicate how many credits are in the machine. And so when you insert a quarter, this coil will fire, turn the wheel, and the number that shows on here, it'll show up on the front back box, I think right here, it'll increase by 1. And then when you hit the start button, that other coil, this one, will push and turn the wheel the other way, which will decrease the number by 1. So that's the credit loading mechanism. And this little light bulb lights up on the front of the machine to actually show you what position this wheel is in, so you know how many credits there are. There's a little magnification lens back here that magnifies it, because as you can see, the numbers on this thing are really small. So there's a little magnifier that's in there that the bulb lights up. I believe that these two mechanisms here have to deal with scoring. I'm not 100% sure how they work. I do know there's a coil here that when you push it, it'll advance this wheel. So I imagine that this is for scoring. There's a set of switches here. There's another coil here. Oh, this wheel's not turning. Maybe it's this coil that turns it. Yeah, it's that one. So this coil, oh, this coil makes it move back. Yeah, like I said, I'm not entirely sure what everything's for because I haven't worked on a lot of electromechanical pinball machines, especially ones that are this old. So I'm kind of learning as I go. But here's where the main problem is. I don't know what this motor assembly does, but these switches are super out of whack because this wheel turns, and as you can see, there's little indentations on the wheel. Those indentations are supposed to hit these switches, and the only switch that this wheel is hitting is the one right here. So these switches are bent way too far back, and you can see, if I go under here, this bracket right here is completely bent downward, so that needs to be straightened out so that the wheel can actually hit these switches. And then I have to figure out what position each of these switches is normally in, because I cannot find schematics for this machine. And it looks like some of these switches are kind of bent out of shape like this. I highly doubt it's supposed to be bent out that far. So that's going to be something I have to diagnose. I don't even know what this does, but that is definitely a problem. These capacitors could also be a problem because they're probably original and they're probably leaking. So it wouldn't hurt to replace them, but I'll probably get around to doing that once I get the feel for how this machine works and kind of understand what everything does. So we'll leave those in for now. So the previous owner that I bought this machine from said that it worked up until the point they started taking pictures of it to sell it. So this thing was working, but now it's not. And I can confirm that it's not. I can plug it in and just show you what it does, which is not much. Plug that in. And as you can see, we do have life out of it. There is a light that's lighting up in the back box. And the way to get access to the back box illumination is you have to pull these little metal things back. There's one here and there's one up on the top. And then this whole thing will hinge outward. And there's two big bulbs, probably about that big, that light up a couple sections on the back box. So there's not a ton of lighting there. As you can see, there's a light here. There's also one up here. Those are the only two lights that light up when the machine is plugged in. So I haven't done really much with this machine at all, other than just kind of check it out, you know, go into it and just see what things look like. I haven't really done any testing of it yet. I do know that if I push the coin mechanism in all the way, you won't be able to see it. I probably won't be able to hold it and push it back and go back there at the same time, but I do notice that when I push this all the way in, this lamp lights up and shows the credit number on the back glass. But the problem is it's so dim, you can barely even see it. I mean, you really have to look at it to see the number that's there. The light bulb's bright, but once the light gets to the back glass, it's super dim. So maybe I could clean off this bulb, clean off the little magnifier lens that's back there. You can kind of see it right there where my finger is. That's a little magnifier. And yeah, you can tell this thing absolutely did have a back door because it says look for pictorial diagram on the inside of back door. And I wish I had the back door with that diagram, because I looked online on several different sites like Internet Pinball Database, Pinside, and some other places. I can't find any documentation for this thing other than like a flyer and a billboard advertisement from 1948. That's all I can find. So if anyone has a schematic diagram or like a startup sequence for this machine, let me know where I can find that or send it to me, because I would very much appreciate it. It would make repairing this thing a lot easier, especially when trying to figure out switch positions. Like, do I know that this switch is supposed to be open or should it be closed? I don't know that unless I have a schematic. So if anyone has access to that kind of information, that would be awesome. But another thing I do notice is we have no lights on the play field, and I looked under one of these bumpers. That's not really a bumper, it's just a switch. It's not an actual pop bumper, but there are lights under them, and so we have no playfield lights whatsoever. So that would almost indicate a blown fuse. But I've looked inside the coin door. There's a fuse box in there. I'll go ahead and put the camera on the tripod so we can take a look at this. So this coin door is a little bit different than you would expect from a pinball machine. It's mostly the same, but it is kind of different. So you unlock it as you would a normal pinball machine. And it hinges open like a normal coin door, but it doesn't have hinges. It just comes out. There's a little indentation that goes behind the machine like this, so it doesn't come out, and then it locks. And so there's a little hanging piece of wood on the coin door that prevents the left side from coming out. So you unlock the coin door and you take it out fully, and the only thing that's holding it in is this connector here, which just pulls out. And once you get that out, then the coin door is free. Put that back in there. And so looking at the coin door itself, I don't see anything wrong with it. The mechanism for the coin switch looks like it's working. I was looking at the switches. There's a set of switches right here. And it does switch positions. There's a closed and open position. There's a closed and closed position, and there's a open and closed position. So it looks like that switch assembly right there is working. We also have a play counter that shows you how many times this machine's been played throughout its life, 12,179 times. And I suppose it could have rolled over, but I would imagine 12,179 is how many times it was played. Here's where that connector came out of. Here's the lock. There's the serial number of the machine. There's a coil here, and I assume what this is for is once you tell the machine to start, this coil will energize, and it looks like it's running to the counter, the play counter here. And so I would imagine that coil adjusts the play counter by 1. I'd have to follow the wires to make sure that's actually where it's going. No, I'm wrong. That coil does not activate this because the wire goes to here and it goes to a ground under the sticker. Oh, here's the coil. It's under here. So this is the coil that increments the counter. And it looks like if I push this right here, it'll increment the counter, but I don't want to do that because then it would be a false reading. So here's the coin door. It looks like it's all right. Doesn't look like there's anything particularly wrong with it. Looks like I left my screwdriver in there. Didn't mean to do that. Set that right there. So inside the coin door, you can see we have our coin box for where the coin goes into. And I think there should be another little box that's in here to store the coins that you can just pull out, but that's missing. Up here we have a power outlet and it says service outlet for soldering iron. So that is what was designed to plug in here. We have a few labels. It says to cut off game lights, press second button from front underneath cabinet. And I did notice there were some switches there underneath the cabinet on the inside of the machine. This one talks about the tilt sensor. So this machine actually does have a tilt capability. It says this game is wired so the tilt operates only after 10,000 has been scored, which is kind of interesting. Here we have one of the fuse blocks. There's a 2 amp, 10 amp, 15 amp, and 5 amp fuse. It doesn't look like any of them are blown. I only took one of them out just to look at it and it wasn't blown. But to me, they look okay. And so if there is a blown fuse, it would be elsewhere. The tilt switch is actually right over here, and it looks not too dissimilar from what you would find in a modern pinball machine. So obviously they got that formula right early on. So there's not really much else you can see from here. For that, I'll have to lift open the play field. Well, it turns out I didn't look hard enough at the fuse box. This 15 amp fuse is blown, so I'm going to go ahead and replace that and see if we get any more life out of this machine. Well, after replacing that 15 amp fuse, the machine now has a lot more life than it did before. But before I show you what changed, I did some more fiddling with the back box, and now I know what most of the stuff back here does. This is the 1,000 point scoring system, and this one is the 10,000 point scoring system. So if you notice on the back box, there are lights for every 1,000 points you score, and then there's obviously lights for every 10,000 points you score, and it'll go up to in the 100,000s to get up to 900,000. So this wheel, when this coil activates, it will turn the wheel. That's not where you press it at. And that will give you 1,000 points. Same with this one. If you push this coil, it will give you 1,000 points. This coil is a reset for the 10,000 points. So when the game goes to reset the score, say if you have it like right here and your game's over, this coil will activate and put the wheel back down. And then these switches will close. I figured out that both this wheel and this one need a lot of grease because they don't want to really move properly, especially this one. If you press it, the wheel should be moving to the next space. See how it barely wants to? So obviously I'm going to have to grease this up. Same with this one, because if I have it at a really high value, if I just manually turn the wheel to like here and then I reset it, see how it doesn't want to go all the way back down? So it clearly needs some grease because you just heard it squeak. It should go all the way down immediately without any trouble. So when the switches are closed, this thing runs, and I will show you that here in a minute. I figured out that the position right above where the switches are closed, so if I turn it clockwise once, that's the 0 position. So that's when the 10,000 point scoring reel or scoring light is at 0 points. But I also have to figure this out because I'm to the point where this thing is actually running, except for these switches have to get bent back into their original position because I showed you how bent up this was. So since I can't find any schematics, it's just going to be a trial and error for getting these switches to work. But once I figured this out, it should be almost functional. So I'll show you what happens. So right now it's kind of in its standby mode. When you first plug it in, all it does is light up the two bulbs in the back box. But if I go ahead and push this all the way in to start a game, we get some life. And you can hear it trying to reset right now. That's this thing running. But obviously it's not resetting properly because it's not hitting any of the switches. So what I figured out is that these switches down here activate this. And this goes into kind of a position that's one less than the 0 position to put the switches down. If I move this back to the 0 position, this stops because now the switches are open. So now that doesn't run anymore, and now it's in the gameplay mode. As you can see, now we have some playfield lights, like the bumper lights are lit, and it looks like all of them are lit. Now, it's hard to say for sure if all the lights are working. I did do some messing around with this thing, and it looks like the majority of them are, but we have for sure some loose connections in the back box because sometimes the lights light up properly and sometimes they don't. I've tested the scoring systems and they kind of sort of work, but it definitely needs a tune-up. So what I'm going to do is show you what happens if I score a 10,000, no, a 1,000 point target, which I think is this one. So as you can see right now, the 1,000 point scoring reel is at 2,000. So if I hit this little bumper here, it advanced to 3,000. You can kind of see it lit there. And if I do it again, as you can see, that's one of those times where it fired the coil to advance this wheel, but the wheel didn't move, so it didn't change the score. So as you can see, it's kind of having trouble. It's kind of in an in-between state right now because you see how some of the lights are not lit. But I guarantee you if I move this by hand, let's see. Yep, the 4,000 is now lit. So obviously we have a wheel that needs to be greased and we have bad contacts. I assume there's like some sort of contact behind here that lights up each individual light. I'll have to spray some contact cleaner in there, but that shouldn't be a big deal to get working, and neither should this one. But another thing I've noticed is that if I go up all the way, as you can see, it's kind of intermittent. If I go up, come on, to all the way to 9,000, yeah, like right now it should be at 7,000, but it's not. I see I had to turn that by hand. Now it's at 7,000, so it just needs some grease. So if we go to 8,000, 9,000, sometimes if you go past 9,000, it won't score the 10,000, I've noticed. Like that time it didn't. Like I think it's back at 0 right now, because if I hit it again, now the 1,000 is lit. So something's going on to where it won't always advance the 10,000 point coil, which would be this one. It does do it sometimes, but not all the time. Let's see, what does this bumper score? Obviously the bigger point scores right now aren't going to work because the scoring motor, the motor that handles kind of the bigger score values, is not set up right. So for example, if I try to roll this, you can hear it try to turn, but it's not advancing anything because the switches are all messed up. But I think this might score 10,000. It says 50,000 when Catalina is hit. Let's see what it scores. Yeah, that scores the 10,000. So that advanced, and there's a bell underneath the playfield that also rings when you hit that one. I think that might score 10,000 when you hit it. Some of these lights I think are either burned out or just have loose connections because I don't always light up. So I think right now the 20,000 light should be lit. Let's hit it again. Yeah, so either 20,000 is burned out or just not making contact because now 30,000 is lit. So this machine seems like it's mostly working. It seems like all of the switches are working. They weren't all working at first, but after kind of messing with it for a while, it seemed to kind of wake up, because some of these lane switches here weren't working. The ball hole switches here weren't working, and now they are. As you can see, it's trying to advance the score, but it can't because the wheel's messed up. Yeah, it seems like it wants to work. I mean, we have the credit light lit, so it will actually show how many credits are in the machine. I don't know how well that's visible. It looks like it might say 9. I can't tell if that's the number that's lit. I can go down on it because there's 2 coils, one that makes it go up and one that goes down. I think that's the one that goes down, so let's see what it says now. Yeah, now it says 8. You can barely see that, so obviously that's supposed to be brighter. Like, I can't imagine it's supposed to be that dim. But that is working. So yeah, just one fuse got us a long way forward. And yeah, another thing that I forgot to show was when you first reset the game, we have back box lights now for Catalina. So there's more lighting back there that comes on when you do the first reset of the game. So now it's going to be kind of troubleshooting and tuning this thing up to see if we can get it working. Another problem that I just figured out recently was the flipper buttons. So if I were to hit the flipper button on the right, it fires all of the flippers. Same with the one on the left. I don't know why the score motor's doing that. And now it didn't. There must be a switch that's getting hit because of the vibration of the flippers. I'll have to do some switch tune-up to get it to work properly. But yeah, we got quite a long way with just replacing a blown fuse. And I'm not sure why the fuse blew, because I didn't see anything wrong. I didn't see any shorted wires. The wiring all looked good. So now I guess I'll open up the playfield and show you the underneath. So opening up the playfield on this thing is exactly the same as a more modern pinball machine, right down to how it opens and how it's propped up. So I kind of grab down here by the ball return and this little empty slot right here. Oh, one thing you want to do before you open this, there are 4 screws here that hold the playfield in place. It's actually screwed down. 2 of them are missing, these front 2 are missing, but I undid these back 2 screws, and now the playfield is free. So if you open it up, you just hinge it up like that. There's a little wooden arm down here, and that goes into a little hole in the playfield right here, and that keeps it up. So here's the underside of the playfield with all the electromechanical goodness. You can see all the coils lining up this whole thing. Bunches of switches. You can see all the bulbs that are there that are actually working. Down at the bottom, there's not really that much, surprisingly. We have that bell that I was talking about, so this gets power and rings the bell. We have another connector down here, probably coming out from the top. That's what it looks like to me. And then the main power transformer. Now, I did notice on the bottom that we have these 2 switches, and there's a little hole on this one, almost as if you could like stick something through and close the switch. I'm not really sure what these do, because it looks like you can just pull them up and close them to see what those do. But you can kind of see more the inside of the ball carriage. The balls drop down in here and they roll and they get stored right there. And when you hit the bottom plunger, it pushes this big metal mechanism up, and that brings a ball up into the playfield. And so that's how that works. We have the flipper button switch right here, so I'm obviously going to have to take a look at these 2 switches and see where they're wired together, because they're obviously not supposed to be wired together. And we'll have to figure that one out. Here's the tilt switch that I showed earlier, and everything actually looks pretty nice under here. This part is what the quarter assembly pushes on to start the game, and if you push that down, it moves this piece of metal down, and it actually moves quite a bit down. There's a lot of stuff that moves when you do that. You can see a lot of switches getting hit there, so that is obviously causing... Is that hitting every switch? It almost looks like it's pushing against every single one. Yeah, I think it is. So if I had a schematic, I'd be able to tell you what all those do, but I am dead in the water when it comes to that. It's able to start the game, so I assume all the switches are in the correct position, but I'll obviously find that out as time goes on and I play the game and make sure everything's operating correctly. So yeah, most of the switches and relays are here. I did figure out that this is the dual flipper coil, so this is how the flippers are joined together via this metal rod. So when that moves down, that moves the flippers, as you can see. And the coil that drives that is right here. So this is one of the flipper coils. It does not look like the others, so I imagine it was replaced. Let's take a look at the one on the other side. Was it replaced? No, this one looks original. Looks like all the coils in this thing are black. This is not tight all the way. You can see it's loose. I'll have to tighten that down. But it doesn't look like this machine was messed with too much underneath the playfield. It all looks pretty normal. And if you're wondering how the bumper switches work in this game, because remember, these aren't actual bumpers, it's just a switch that gets hit when the ball hits that. It just hits this little wire right here, pushes up against a little metal wire, and that's how it sends contact to the score reel to give you points. So once you kind of know what you're doing with these machines, it's not super hard to figure out what's wrong with them, but we still have a ways to go to get this machine to a state where you can just plug it in and press start and play it. So the next thing we have to do to really get this machine going is fix this, because the switches are all out of whack. And I'm gonna have to figure out a way to bend this bracket back up so it's flat, and that will hopefully get at least some of these switches back in the right position. I mean, this one does not look right being bent out that far, but with trial and error, as I said, we'll get these switches figured out and we'll get it to a point where we can reset the scores. I'll grease up these scoring reels and we'll just give this machine the tune-up that it's needed for probably a long time. So I will come back with some updates. All right, it's now the next day and I'm ready to do some more work on this machine. I just wanted to show a couple other things that I found while looking at all the components in this thing that will help make repairing it a lot easier. So, the first thing that I was looking at was this mechanism here. And I had no idea what this did because I know this thing doesn't have like a ball counter because this thing has a completely manual ball system. It doesn't keep track of what ball is in play. And I saw on this side of the mechanism we have two coils, one here and one here. And so obviously one of the coils makes this wheel turn one way and the other makes it go back the other way. And so when I had the machine running and I was advancing these coils, this mechanism moved, and you can see there's little metal contacts that will touch different points depending on what position this wheel is in. Well, I was advancing those coils to see what was changing on the playfield, and that advances the ball bonus. So there's certain targets that will advance this up by 5,000. That's what that coil does. And when I hit the other coil to bring the wheel back down, the bonus value went down. So that's what that mechanism is for. I also figured out what the problem was with the ball loading mechanism, why it sometimes loads two balls instead of just one. You can see right now there are two balls inside the hole, and so if I hit the plunger, it's going to load up the two. Well, watch what happens if, say, these 4 balls, pretend these 4 balls had just dropped in here and they're gonna roll down in there. So watch what happens if I do that. See, the second ball rolls right on top of the one that's already in there. So that tells me the mechanism that pushes up the balls is too low. And I see that there's a little adjustment for that right here. This is the little bump stop that the mechanism stops at when it's not used. And it looks like there's a little bit of an adjustment that you can make with these screws. You can slide it just a little bit. And I think that I can just slide that forward a little bit, and that should mitigate that problem so that the ball doesn't roll on top of the other one. It just needs to sit higher. So that's the problem with that. Another thing I noticed is that there's a light bulb here, and I never saw it light up. Well, that's because the socket inside of the socket is corroded, because if I move the bulb around like that, it will light up. And that bulb lights up the little plunger gauge up here. Totally useless for gameplay, but it's just a thing, a little gauge that you can see when you shoot the ball. But the light bulb lights this up. And so I'm gonna have to clean out the inside of the socket, and then that should work again. And another thing that is really confusing to me is I was able to get the play counter to work. As you can see now, it's up a few numbers than it was before. And that is controlled by this button underneath the cabinet with this switch right here. And I'm not entirely sure why that switch exists, because when I had the game running and I was hitting that switch, the only thing this does is it advances the counter by 1, and it makes the credit wheel go down by 1. It'll decrease the number of credits that are shown here. And so that almost makes it seem like it's the machine's start button. But we've noticed that pushing the coin mech in and hitting the main switch up here is what starts the machine. And when you do that, the only thing in the back box that fires is the coil that resets the 10,000 point score reel. It doesn't affect this. And so I'm wondering if there's just something wired up wrong, because it would make more sense to me that when you push this, not only will it reset the 10,000 point coil, but it will also make the credit wheel go down and advance the counter. Because I can't imagine that, you know, say this is in like an arcade or something, you're playing this, you put a quarter in, no one's gonna reach down here and push this button just to make the credit wheel go down and advance the counter. Like, there's no point in that. So that is really confusing to me. I'm not sure why that's there. If someone can enlighten me on that, that would be great, because I can't find any documentation about this machine. I did figure out what these 2 switches on the bottom were for. This one kind of resets the machine back into its standby mode. If you close the switch, it'll turn off all the game lights and it'll deactivate the transformer. And I probably should have realized that, because there's a tag right here that says what that switch does. Press second button from underneath cabinet and it cuts off the game lights. So that's what that does. This one is a slam tilt switch. So it has 2 tilt switches. So if you close this, it'll engage the tilt. So it does the exact same thing as this. So as you can see, we're kind of getting to better places with this machine, because now I know what some of this stuff does. But it would be really helpful if these relays were labeled. If they were labeled, the stickers are long gone, but because there's no documentation, I don't know what any of these relays does. Well, I really shouldn't call them relays, they're switches. And same with these. I don't know what these do. I don't think these have any labels. They don't, so that's all a mystery. But it does seem like they're working, because the game does try to start normally. So I'm not really too concerned about these switches for now. The main thing I'm concerned with is the scoring system in the back box that needs a lot of attention. So I'm gonna go ahead and do a little bit of maintenance to this thing. I'll fix this light bulb. I'll see if I can adjust the ball mechanism here. And I'll kind of do some other little things just to, you know, tune it up a little bit. I will do an in-depth process on me trying to fix the scoring system because I think this is where the machine has the most trouble. So I'm gonna go ahead and get some little things knocked out, and I will come back once I'm finished doing that. All right, I've done some more work to this machine and I have fixed a few of its problems. So let's go over what I did. First thing I fixed was the ball loading mechanism. I adjusted the little adjustment for this bump stop. It was all the way back. I moved it all the way forward because there's some adjustment in these two screws here that hold it in. And so now, when the balls are loaded, only one of them is inside the ball carriage. And I can show you that. Pretend that these 4 balls had just dropped through and are going to reload themselves. Before, this ball would have enough clearance to go on top of that one, and it doesn't now. So as you can see now, the 4th ball stops before the one that's already loaded. So now when you load it, it just loads the one, which is exactly how it should work. I also sanded the inside of this light bulb contact, and I haven't tested it yet, but I assume it works now. So now when you start the game, this bulb should be lit and you should be able to see it light up this area here by the plunger. And the main problem in the back box with the scoring motor, I got this bent back to straight. Now this thing is actually hitting the switches, but I can still tell it needs a bit of a tune-up. So if I turn this, if you watch the bottom one, see how it has 5 indentations, so it should knock the switch 5 times. So if you look at the bottom set of switches right here, it's actually moving the switches now. But I can tell that for some of these switches, it's still not working right. Like if you look at the middle set, let's see, where are they gonna hit right now? See, it's got these 2 closed, but I think that these 2 also need to be closed. So this has to be bent back because that switch obviously is bent way too far out. And then same goes for this top switch. So if you look, let's go to the indentation on the top. It doesn't close all the way. As you can see, it touches it, but it doesn't close the switch. So this one needs to be bent back. So this should be actually pretty simple to repair. And then we should be able to have a properly working scoring motor that actually gives us the correct points and resets the machine back to 0 when you start a new game. So now what I'm going to do is grease up these gears so that they turn properly and don't get jammed. All right, so we're back in the back box, and this is the 10,000 point scoring reel that you're looking at. And I've since realized that just like the bonus coil underneath the playfield, there's a set of contacts back here that turns on each individual light when the wheel turns. And as you remember, we saw those lights being intermittent. So obviously those contacts need to be cleaned. So when I start to fix this thing, I'm gonna have to take it out so I can put contact cleaner on the contacts that are behind here. And so to take this whole thing out, it's held on by 4 screws under here on each side. There's 2 on each side. So I'll remove those and I should be able to lower this down. And this thing's not tight really to begin with. See, it's kind of moving around. So it's a good thing I'm removing this and fixing it now. Well, I don't have it completely off, but I don't think I need to in order to spray the contacts that are back here because I can access them now. So I'm just going to leave it like that. Hopefully it doesn't fall off. I don't think it's going to. I will spray those and grease this up and we'll see how much better it is. And before I do that, one thing that I did notice when I pulled this back, if you look up here, we see you have some little wires that are connected into these little sockets here. There's 2 of them that are not connected, and there's 2 slots that don't have anything in them. So I imagine that they go here. I guess I'll put them in there. Actually, I'm going to take them out because it makes it easier for this thing to fold back. This doesn't have enough space to make it, so I'll leave those out for now, and I'll get this wheel fixed up. Oh, that did it. So I sprayed a ton of lubricant on those contacts in the back that light up the lights. And now, if you spin the wheel up, we'll spin it all the way up. Look at the reset. Watch what happens. Just goes right back. That's what it should do. So this scoring wheel is now fixed. I lubricated both of the coils as well. So if I press them, they both advance the wheel just fine. And of course now the reset is working correctly. Just goes right back down to 0. So that's awesome. So now let's move on to the 1,000 point scoring wheel. Okay, so I'm just about ready to start putting some lubricant in the 1,000 point scoring mechanism here. But to make that process easier, what I'm going to do is hinge open the back box. And to do that, there's these 2 metal clamps right here. So if I push those out, this part of the back box swings open. It can only swing out to there. And when you have that open, that allows you to change the 2 light bulbs that are lighting up the back box. As you can see, they're just standard light bulbs. I did order some LED bulbs that basically have the exact same footprint as this and the same color temperature as well, warm white. So they'll look just like light bulbs, but they'll be LEDs, because what happens is when these bulbs run, they get hot, and that's what's responsible for the back glass peeling. As you can see, there's a little bit by this lady's hat. There's a little bit of peeling there. There's some peeling up by this boat, and that's kind of right where the lights are. As you can see, this light right next to the boat. So it's the heat that is causing the back glass paint to peel off. So it's very important, especially on a machine this old, to put LEDs, at least here. I think I'm going to put some LEDs in the playfield as well. I ordered a set of warm white LEDs so they would look exactly like the original light bulbs, because I kind of wanted to keep the original appearance of the machine, but I wanted to put LEDs in it so that heat didn't ruin any of the plastics. So that's my plan. And since I have this back box assembly open, I can show you the contacts that are behind here that are responsible for lighting up each LED, or each bulb rather. It's just like the bonus coil underneath the playfield. You can see there's this little mechanism here that will turn and light up different contacts. It doesn't look like the contacts are on this side, but if I hit the coil to advance it, you'll see that move. See, that's moving. There's a series of contacts that shift places, and that's responsible for lighting up each individual light bulb on the back glass for when you score 1,000 points. And there's one just like that back here. I put some contact cleaner on that thing, and now it's working great. So I'm going to do the same for this wheel, and we'll see how much better it is. You can see how this one is really bad right now. I pushed the coil, and right now it should be advancing out. It should already be advanced, but it's not. You can see how badly this wheel needs grease. So we're gonna go ahead and get that greased up. So here's what I just did to test. If I push the coil right here, it's not this part of the mechanism that's binding up. And if I push here, it's not that part of the binding, or it's not that part of the mechanism that's binding up. So it's to do with the wheel or the contacts in the back. So what we can do to find that out is push the coil in, hold this up, and try to spin the wheel. Oh yeah, it's the wheel. Look at that. See how that's so hard to move? So it is absolutely everything to do with the wheel. So I have to try to get that working right to the point where it can actually rotate smoothly. Okay, it must be the wheel bearing itself because doing the contacts with lubricant did not help it. So it's obviously the shaft inside the wheel is gummed up. So I'm gonna have to figure out how I'm gonna get inside that shaft. And I think I might see an opening right there. There we go. That was it right there. Now it's advancing without my help. Perfect, that's working now. Both of these should be working completely fine. So that's another thing off the to-do list. All right, so now let's move on to the credit wheel. And it doesn't look like this one needs grease because if I advance it, it advances normally. And if I go down with the other coil, it goes down normally. But I think I am gonna just give it some light grease just so that it doesn't get gummed up. But I wanted to move to the credit wheel specifically because I noticed a problem with the switches on this one. So I'm gonna go ahead and close the back box and show you what that is. And all you do is just push this back until the clamps snap back into position. So it's real easy to put that back in. So first let's take a look at the 10,000 point score reel. You can see that this metal post is responsible for pushing down on these switches and activating the scoring motor. So if I reset the reel here, you can see that that post pushes down on the switches and makes them go into the other position. But if we look at the credit wheel, you can see the post is about ready to come down and hit the switches. But if I advance this down to the 0 position, that's right there, and the post does not hit the switches. So obviously the switches here are bent because what I think should happen is the post should hit right here and cause the switches to open. So we're gonna have to fix that, and I think it's just as simple as bending the switches at this little metal bracket right here, and that should fix that problem. All right, after using some pliers and bending this a little bit, I think I got it. So right now it's in the 0 position. The post is hitting the switches and both of them are open. So let's go ahead and advance this by 1 and see if the switches close. And yes, they do. So that has been fixed. So now when this thing is at 0 credits, the switch is open. And so what that'll have the effect of doing is turning this light off when we're at 0 credits. I'm not exactly sure what the top switch does yet, but I did go ahead and clean every switch in the back box with some contact cleaner. And there were some ones that were extremely filthy, like they immediately made the Q-tip I was using black. So every switch has been cleaned, so now they should all work normally. So now let's move on to the score motor because I still have to mess with those switches. Okay, now let's move on to the main problem of this whole machine. So I've been studying the switches on this, and I think I know what the default position of each switch is. So if I turn this motor, let's first look at the top one. So there's only one switch wired to the top one, and it should close when we go over the indentation on the top. And as you can see, it does not close because everything's pushed out way too far. So we'll fix that one first. All right, I bent that in a little bit, so now I think it should hit when we go over the first indentation, so let's watch that now. And yes, now it closes that first switch. So I think the top section of this motor is now working properly because when we go over this indentation here, it closes the switch. So that's what we should do. Let's move on to the middle section and take a look at that. So by looking at the middle section, we have two switches, one inside here and this one out on the edge that was bent way out. So When we take a look, it's just about to go over an indentation, so watch the middle set of switches right here. The first one closes, and the second one does absolutely nothing. And this is the only switch I'm confused about. So that's actually a pretty good thing, because right now it's closed, and so I don't know if it's going to open the switch or close it. It looks like it should close it because it's pushing against the rear part of the switch here, like that. So I think this switch is normally open, and then when this pushes it, it will close the switch. So I'm gonna adjust it for that. I need to bend multiple things here. So first off, let's bend this part of the switch back so that it's no longer stuck closed. And then this one's obviously gonna have to be bent way farther in. All right, so this back switch is now open. So if I go ahead and move the wheel, go ahead and watch the middle two switches there. The first one closes and the second one closes. So it looks like that switch, that set of switches, is now working. First one closed, second one closed. Let's move on to the bottom switch here. And that one might actually be working. There's only a single switch, it looks like. Yeah, the bottom one only has one switch, and that is closing and opening at its proper times. So that one is actually working just fine. So I think this thing is now perfectly working. So now would be a great time to test everything that I've done and see if this machine actually resets properly now. So this should be a really good test. All right, we're kind of at our moment of truth point here. So let's go ahead and push the quarter slot in, start the game, and we'll see if this thing does a proper score reset sequence. I think it did it. I saw these little things pop out when it was doing the 5,000 point score in the back. You could hear it go da 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 da. So that was obviously the part of the scoring motor that had 5 little indentations. And so that ran and it was popping these out just in case there were any balls in there. But I think it reset because we don't have any of these 10,000 points lit. We don't have any 1,000 points lit. I think that's the first successful game reset we've ever had. So now what I want to do is go ahead and test some targets and see if it actually scores the correct value on the back box. So I'm going to go ahead and hit a couple targets on the playfield to see if they score correctly. There still might be a few problems because we had that sensitive switch that would occur whenever I hit the flippers. So I still have to do some playfield switch cleaning and tune-up. I have not done any switches underneath the playfield, so that'll be my next thing. But I'm going to go ahead and hit some things and we'll see if it scores properly. So I'm going to hit one of the pop bumpers and it should score 1,000 on the back glass. Did I? Well, that's scoring more. So maybe that one is worth more points? It's still not scoring the 10,000. Let's see, do we have a 1,000 point target that I can hit? That one. All right, so that's working great now. And that scored 10,000, as it should. See how much nicer that's operating now that it's been greased? Oh, did we miss a turn? It should not have missed a turn. Maybe it didn't fire the coil long enough. Let's hit that one again. Okay. Okay. Still having some trouble there. Okay, so it's working, but it's intermittent. So obviously I need to put some more grease back there, more contact cleaner on those contacts to get it to score right. I really should be watching back there to see what it's doing. 8, 9. Okay, so that did what it was supposed to do. Let's go through that again. Oh yeah, so we do still have a little bit of an issue. I see what's happening. If I go ahead and hit that same bumper that I was just hitting, you can watch the scoring reel advance. Let's see if I can hit it. So that's a proper advance. There we go. Did you see that? It tried to advance, but it didn't. It's because of this. We need some grease under there. So after doing that, that should make that work. And then I'll go ahead and spray some more contact cleaner back behind here, because sometimes the 10,000 point scoring is not working. But if I advance it manually, it should work. Yeah, so that was a 10,000 point advance that you just heard. So obviously it's working, it's just intermittent. So it needs a little bit more of a tune-up, and then it should work fine. Okay, after applying some more lubricant and contact cleaner to the contacts, let's go ahead and start the game again and see if it does a reset. And it sure does. So we got that problem fixed. Let's go ahead and hit some of those 1,000 point targets and see if it actually works now. So 1,000, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It should go to 10,000 now. And it does. So it looks like we got that fixed. Let's do it again. Oop, did we just have another incident? We did. So it's not 100% perfect, but it seems like it's better. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, there was one. There's another one. I might have to put some actual lithium grease on that gear to make it so that it moves perfect. So 8. Yep, there was another one. 9. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So it tried to score the 10,000 as I was moving on, but the coil messed up. It didn't go past 9,000, so that's why it did that twice. So it looks like scoring is working. It just needs some more encouragement. So I'll go ahead and put some like actual lithium grease on that gear. Maybe I'll do it on the 10,000 point gear too, and we'll go from there. It couldn't possibly have any more issues after this, right? Okay, this is the 1,000 point scoring reel. I put a thin layer of lithium grease across the whole thing. I put some right in here where it was binding up, and also put a little bit back there where it's rubbing against the metal. So I think now it'll operate correctly. I might put some lithium grease in this one later, I'm not sure, but for now, I think we should test the machine out to see if it scores right. There's 1,000, 2, 3, 4. We still have a problem. What the heck? What could possibly be going? Well, I think I found the real problem. So, you know how I said before that sometimes the coil doesn't seem like it goes far enough back so that the wheel could turn? Well, looking at the coil, this wire looks like it's about ready to fall off. I mean, look at that. So maybe there really isn't enough voltage getting to the coil so that it can fire fully. So I am absolutely going to have to fix this wire, because you can see not all the strands are even soldered down. So I'll go ahead and redo both these wires, and then we'll see if it works after that. Well, after putting lithium grease on that gear, and even going so far as to take that whole gear assembly out and sanding the contacts behind it to activate the lights, it still has a little bit of trouble scoring sometimes. But I did figure out a problem on this machine that has been nagging at me for the longest time. If you remember, when I hit any of the flipper buttons, the scoring motor would turn and the machine would go clickety-clack for a long time. Well, I figured out that it would actually do that even on the slightest vibration. You can see It shouldn't be doing that because I didn't touch anything. Well, when I did that, I looked for what relay under here was activating. So let me do that again. And you can see it's this one right here. Now I've been kind of going through these relays and pushing them down and seeing what they do, and I've figured out what quite a bit of these relays on the right side do, and I've labeled them. So that top one scores 1,000 points, that one scores 5,000, this one scores 5,000, and it adds 5,000 to your bonus. The ones that are not labeled, I'm not 100% sure what they do yet, but I'm gonna get there once I mess around with the switches on the playfield and see what activates what relay. But the relay in question that was activating is this one, the 25,000 bonus relay. So this adds 25,000 points to your bonus. And the reason I figured out that a switch on the 25,000 bonus relay was the problem was because when I hit a switch that adds 25,000 to your bonus, like this one, it makes the same exact sound. And it triggered the same relay that triggered when I vibrated the table. So that told me the switch that has a problem is one that adds 25,000 points to your bonus. So I went looking around the playfield for all the other 25,000 point bonus switches, like this one here, and I just kept looking around, and then I got to the one on this side. For the left in lane right here, adds 25,000 points to your bonus. And that is this switch right here. And look what happens when I just barely touch it. See that? That's the problem right there. That switch is borderline closed. I don't know how well I can get that on camera. That guy right there. It's like ever so slightly open, but barely. And so that's the one that's been causing all the problems. That's the one that hits itself closed when you vibrate the table. So once I bend that out, we will no longer have that problem. I have finally fixed the scoring. So what was wrong were two different things. The first thing, the reason why it wouldn't always score the 10,000 points when you went past 9,000, well, I took this scoring reel out again and I looked at the contacts on the back. And there were two of them that looked like they had basically fallen off due to a whole bunch of corrosion. So what I did was I took a little metal pick like this and I scraped that corrosion off, so I revealed bare metal where the contacts were used to be. And then I just put a blob of solder on them so that they would basically look just like the original contacts. That fixed that problem. This machine now scores 10,000 points every time we go past 9,000. The problem where the coil wouldn't always advance was due to something that I didn't expect. If you look right here, as you can see, I inserted a washer in between this little arm and the coil. Well, that's because if I take the washer out, you can see right here, there's a little bit of play in between the arm and the part where the arm rests inside the coil. And I noticed on the 10,000 point coil, there is no play at all. And so what I figured out was if you push the coil from the coil end, it will never advance, as you can see. But if I push the little arm, because it has a little bit of play, if I push it, just watch, it advances. So the whole issue is this little bit of play right here, and that was sometimes keeping the coil from advancing properly. So what I did was I sprayed a little bit of grease in there, and then I got a little thin washer like this. I pushed it so that I had room here on the left. I stuck the washer in there, just like that. So with the washer in there, now when I push the coil from the coil end, it advances. And I was testing that by hitting some targets on the playfield, both 1,000 and 5,000 point targets, and it was scoring perfectly every single time, not one problem. So that was the issue, and so now all issues related to scoring on this machine are finally fixed. And so what I'm going to do to keep that washer in there is I'm going to put a little dab of hot glue right here in between the coil and the washer. So hopefully that should stay in there during gameplay. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And then we can do our first actual gameplay test of Catalina and see how well it works. Okay, so I think we're ready now to do our first official gameplay test of Catalina and see how the game works. I do want to go over a few minor updates that I did after the last clip before we start the game. The first thing I did is I fixed this left flipper. As you can see, it no longer has the washer in there, and it actually turned out to be a very simple problem. There's a little metal piece under each of the flippers that locks on to the coil, the rod assembly underneath at a specific angle, and that piece wasn't in the right position. So I got that fixed, and now this left flipper is operating normally, and I made sure that all the other flippers were good as well, and they are. So now all the flippers are working. I also went ahead and put some grease on a lot of the coils and moving parts underneath the playfield, especially for the ball kick-out holes here, because I noticed they were kind of having trouble. So those should perform better. The only other mechanical problem in this game now that I know of is this bumper right here likes to get stuck down. And I did put some grease on the inside spring and inside the bumper. That didn't help, so I'm obviously gonna have to take apart this bumper and see what I can do to get it free again. But it's only this bumper. The rest of them work absolutely fine. As you can see, this one just likes to get stuck. So with that in mind, that should be the only problem that I encounter when playing this game. So let's go ahead and hit start, and we'll do our first official test of Catalina. You can see we had a much shorter reset sequence there. That's because the scoring in the system now works, and we're not competing with a switch that keeps advancing the 25,000 bonus. We're not competing with that anymore. So the reset sequence should be a lot quicker now, and I can see on the back box, it did a proper reset. None of the lights are lit. So let's go ahead and do a test of the game. Seems like everything's working so far. See, we still have a problem here. So that's something that's going to have to be fixed. The coil, either the coil isn't strong enough or something else is the matter, because it should have kicked that ball out the very first time. So that's something I got to take a look at. Well, that was the first game, and I scored 152,000 points. So not bad for a first test. We saw a little problem right here. I'm gonna go ahead and put one of the balls in each of the holes and just see if they perform better. So yeah, as you can see, we have some either weak coils or something needs grease because it's not wanting to push the ball out. So maybe we do need some new coils for these kick-out holes. Well, that one seems like it's working. Yeah, that one's strong. It's stronger. Let's see about this top one. Yeah, those coils definitely need some service, but it seems like this game is actually working quite well. Let's go ahead and do another round. Kick the ball out first try that time, that's nice. And this was a 25,000 bonus switch, and I do have 25,000 on my bonus. That's the light that's lit, so that's working. Gave me more points than I should have had because it didn't pop the ball out of the coil, so that added like 75,000 to my bonus, but I'll take it. And if you're wondering, yes, it was supposed to do that. That was transferring my bonus because I had like 150 something thousand points. So the bonus coil kept going down, 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 down until the whole bonus was transferred, and then it kicked the ball out. So it was supposed to do that. Alright, so this game is working very well. It just needs a little bit more service. Needs these coils to be looked at and adjusted because they should kick the ball out first try. It likely needs new coils, but I'm not sure. So, the verdict of this game right now is fix this bumper so that it doesn't stick anymore. Take a look at these coils and see what the problem is. If it's the coil, if I just need to put some grease on some of the moving parts. Maybe the flippers could be a little bit stronger. It seemed like they weren't the strongest. Maybe that's just how it is. Like, it should have kicked that out on the first try. So, seems like we're almost there. It's really close. So, yeah, still got a little bit of problems to fix after I fix up those coils and get this bumper working. This game should be 100% working again, which is amazing. Well, this thing was certainly a challenge to fix. We went from a machine that did nothing at all now to a nearly fully working pinball machine from 1948. In part 2 of this video series, we'll be focusing on more of the cosmetics of this machine, like upgrading all of the incandescent bulbs to warm white LEDs. And I think what I might do is sand down the wooden trim pieces on the side of the machine and on the back box, and then restain them just to make them look nice again. And at some point, I'm also going to have to replace the rubbers because some of them are quite cracked, so they've been on there for quite a while. So look forward to those things in the next videos of this series. That's all I have for part 1, and I will see you in my next video.